Possible here then? Well, thank you. I'd like to welcome each of you to this NICC-sponsored panel discussion regarding Common Core state standards. I understand we have visitors that have come from as far away as Muncie and as well as Indianapolis, and we thank you for making this long trip. To begin our service today, or our event today, I would like to invite Pastor Don Delagrange to come up and say a prayer.
A couple things. First of all, if you need restrooms or drinking fountains, you go through these double doors. The next double door is down the hallway, so don't be afraid to do that. And the pastors, when they get the microphone, they can actually preach, pray. I'm not going to do that. But I do believe, though, that probably an important thing to do for our nation, our state, and education is to pray. My daddy taught me that and modeled that growing up as a kid. He prayed for our leaders every day, you know. And we should always be reminded of that. And so I'd like to pray with that in mind today. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you today for the opportunity to be here. And we thank you for the blessings we enjoy and even the challenges that come our way. And today we ask your Holy Spirit to lead in what's going on here today for the sake of our kids and our nation. And I pray for those who lead us, be they local leaders, the state of Indiana, or our national leaders. I ask that you divinely enable them with wisdom to govern as you would like them to govern. And might they be so conscious of their responsibilities that they just fall on their faces before you and ask for wisdom and grace. We ask protective care. And today we pray for the kids in our state. We pray for their education, their well-being, their futures, and especially their spiritual life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Don. You already covered the logistics, so I won't bore you with repeating those directions. My name is Kent Summers. I'm a member of the Fort Wayne 912, also a newly elected member of the Fort Wayne or the Northwest Allen County School Board. Any of my comments I make today are those of me as Kent Summers, the dad of two little girls who are running around somewhere here, who are in elementary school right now, and education is obviously one of the utmost important things for myself and my family. Today we've allotted roughly 75 minutes of time for prepared remarks by our speakers, and then 45 minutes of question and answer. We hope that a dialogue between the audience and our well-informed panel here would provide answers and maybe spark some ideas that we need to take away from here in ways to maybe make a change in the way our education process is going forward here. Now on to Common Core standards. Some of you may be well versed in what Common Core standards are, and others in attendance, this is something quite new to you, a mystery. Regardless of your current understanding of this topic, we hope to leave today with a greater appreciation for the concerns as well as actionable steps each and every one of us can take to empower that our voices are heard. Without delay, let me introduce our first speaker. If you're looking for a modern-day David versus Goliath, the duo of Heather Kruse and Aaron Tuttle is probably the greatest example I can think of. A year ago, Common Core was considered pretty much unstoppable here in the state of Indiana. A very popular school superintendent, and then Tony Bennett was considered a rising star in the education world. But that all changed when two mothers in Indianapolis saw something that didn't make sense to them, and as a result, they started asking questions. And more importantly, when those questions weren't answered by the education leaders, they decided to get involved. And the pause that has occurred for Common Core in the state of Indiana can be directly tied to the work and efforts of two individuals, Heather Kruse, and more importantly, one of our guest speakers today, Aaron Tuttle. So with that, I'd like to invite Aaron up here to share her comments.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. It really was a group effort, and it was, many, many people contributed to that legislation being passed. So I feel a little guilty with that introduction, taking credit like that. But yeah, the Common Core standards are basically academic standards that determine what will be taught and what will not be taught in grades K through 12 in English language arts and mathematics. And the Common Core is different because it's a national set of standards, where historically individual states were in charge of the development of their standards and their student testing. So the idea of national standards and assessments is really nothing new. For decades, progressive education groups have called for centrally controlled academic standards. And many of you may recall the push for national history standards in 1995. Unlike the Common Core standards, these were actually presented to Congress for adoption, and they were so politically correct that they were an inaccurate account of history, and Congress voted the measure down 99-1. While these groups were defeated, they did not go away, and they learned that to be successful, you can't call the standards federal or national. If you've ever met a supporter of Common Core, one of the first things they will always tell you is that it is a state-led effort. So basically, and so they learned that you can't call them, national or federal. And number two, they also learned that they must be adopted quickly and quietly. As many of our own state legislators were unaware that the Common Core was adopted. I think that goes to prove the fact that, they did it without a lot of public input. And the other thing they learned is don't start with controversial issues like history. You need to start with math and English, like the Common Core. So a lot of times they get the question, well, if it wasn't a state-led effort, who wrote the standards? The standards were written by a progressive education nonprofit in Washington, D.C. It's called Achieve. And in order to create the appearance of a state-led effort, they commissioned the National Governors Association and the Chief Council of State School Officers to present the standards to the states. And while their names may sound very official, these groups are trade associations with no instrument of authority from the states. So, this idea that all the governors from the National Governors Association, they all got together and they sat around the table, and, the idea that, Mitch Daniels sat down with his best standards and they all compared them and developed them there is far from the truth of what actually took place. So if we look at these three groups, National Governors Association, Achieve, and the Chief Council of State School Officers, there is an enormous amount of money flowing to them from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create the Common Core. So the National Governors Association received $30 million from the Bill Gates Foundation to develop the Common Core. The Chief Council of State School Officers has received $70 million, and Achieve, the progressive education group, received around $36 million. So the Gates Foundation is one of the driving financial forces behind the Common Core. In fact, even Michael Petrelli, who's of the Fordham Institute, has said that indeed the education policy of the United States is the same as the education policy of Bill Gates. And while he may be a really smart and rich guy, I don't remember electing him to be in charge of education policy. So the American Recovery Act, which is the stimulus money, allowed for the Obama administration to influence states to adopt what he would like to have as education policy for the states. And he actually earmarked about $40 billion to the states through their state stabilization funds. And he said, in order to get this money, you're going to need to kind of do the reforms that I want to do in education. They are ideas on school accountability, building statewide longitudinal database systems on student data, the Common Core assessments, and different teacher evaluation metrics. So what we have kind of with the Common Core standards and the testing and everything that comes along with it, it's really a package. We kind of have a marriage formed between large foundation money, like Bill Gates, and the power of the U.S. Department of Ed's substantial influence through stimulus funds to basically dictate the education policy of the states, which under the 10th Amendment is a power that is granted to the state. So under the stimulus fund, it was $4.35 billion was given to the Department of Ed, who created the Race to the Top competition. So to successfully compete for the money, states had to agree to the Common Core, sight unseen. In fact, Indiana submitted a detailed application before March of 2010 committing to the Common Core with a very detailed plan on how it would be implemented. The draft of the Common Core standards was not released until 3 months later. So I think this goes to show that the Common Core wasn't adopted for its quality, but more to be in compliance with the Obama administration. So the Indiana State Board of Ed adopted the standards formally on June 2nd, 8 weeks after the final draft was released, with literally no vetting of the standards. If states didn't win the money for Race to the Top, like Indiana, they wound up not awarding us the money. The Obama administration had another approach, sort of a stick approach, to get states to commit to the Common Core. And it was by a provision that they give states of the waiver from very onerous provisions of No Child Left Behind, which Indiana was awarded. The administration also awarded $360 million to 2 state consortiums to create new national student assessments that are aligned to the Common Core. And Indiana is a member of PARC. And PARC is sort of a consortium of 22 states that are charged with developing the new Common Core assessments. And it's interesting because they appointed Achieve, the same people who wrote the standards, the same progressive group. They're the managing partner of PARC. So these new tests will have an incredible amount of power because through our waiver from No Child Left Behind, we must use student results on this test to evaluate teachers and schools. So the federal government has also appointed a technical review panel, which has the final say over all the test items that the students will be given on the tests. So basically, the education policy of the states, which I said is the 10th Amendment, is a state's right, is now basically governed by the Federal Department of Education in partnership with private foundations like Gates and trade associations like the National Governors Association and the Chief Council of State School Officers. And why would they have done that? There's a lot of there's a lot of leaders that I had a lot of respect for who supported Common Core. And you have to ask yourself why. These are good people with good intentions. Why would they have adopted and committed to the Common Core? And I would say that some of the political leaders who made these decisions were promised that the Common Core was going to be a rigorous set of internationally benchmarked standards comparable to those in high-performing countries. And many champions of the Common Core claim that American students, they're falling behind their peers in high-performing countries, and we just simply aren't competing well in, the 21st century economy. And I believe that some of them said, we should be more like China. We should have standards like China if we want our students to be able to compete. I mean, personally, I don't want to live in a country that resembles China in any way. But while it was promised that these standards would be really rigorous, internationally benchmarked standards, they didn't deliver on that promise. And instead of designing standards which would strengthen our students' performance, the Common Core will put our students further behind. Just the math standards alone will put our students 2 years behind by 8th grade, 2 years behind their counterparts in high-performing countries like Singapore, Japan. So it's not internationally benchmarked in any sense of the word. And especially in states like Indiana, where we had really high standards to begin with. There's some research out of the University of Wisconsin. It was published by the American Educational Research Association. The Common Core standards share very little in common with those of high-performing countries. In fact, in 8th grade mathematics, the Common Core standards only have a 13% alignment with Singapore. They only have a 17% alignment with Japan and 21% alignment with Finland. I mean, these countries consistently produce the top performing students in mathematics in the world. And like among states that had very high standards to begin with, like Indiana, in English language arts, Massachusetts, super high standards, only 25% alignment. California, only 35% alignment. And our own Indiana standards in grades K through 8, it is only a 31% alignment. So this country is under the impression that the Common Core was developed under the guidance of including the best of high-performing nations and state standards to create the Common Core. But, I mean, if you look at this report, less than 35% was taken from the highest performing states, and an average of only 17 was taken from the highest performing countries. And really, a greater ignorance was paid to the type of cognitive demand called for in high-performing countries. So if they're saying Common Core, we need this to compete against high-performing countries, so we're going to emulate their standards. If that was their intent, the differences in the type of cognitive demand that is called for in high-performing countries is completely different from what the Common Core calls for. We've heard over and over again that performing procedures, like children simply doing a standard algorithm in mathematics, it's bringing it down. Drill and kill, having kids memorize their math facts, that's, the Common Core, they don't think that's important. They're more into this higher, they call it deeper learning that children need to be able to do even at a very young age. But when you look at high-performing countries, they don't do that in the younger grades. They understand our children are good at math because they do the procedures and they do them over and over and over again. That is what children need in their beginnings to be able to have a foundation to be able to then do further, more analytical work in mathematics. There's a difference between arithmetic and mathematics, and the Common Core does not stress basic arithmetic. So a lot of these high-performing countries, they have 75% of their content standards are perform procedure, where the Common Core is a paltry 38%. Memorization is also more of a focus in these high-performing countries, yet this drum continues to beat across the country with the Common Core for less procedural knowledge and greater conceptual understanding. And these high-performing countries, they're not doing that. They've skipped on to the next chapter. And I think there's also this idea that national standards is going to raise student achievement. But if you look at countries with national standards, they generally don't have higher achievement. Canada and Australia are large, diverse countries like the United States with significant, strong student performance as measured on international tests, but neither of these has national standards, tests, or curricula. It is true that some high-achieving countries do have national standards, like Singapore and Finland, but these countries contain a very small, homogeneous population that might be more comparable to one of our states. So, you can't really compare those two things. And there's also many lower achieving countries like Greece and Thailand that have national standards and curriculum. So there really is no correlation between having national standards and having a higher national performance in student achievement. And then I don't know, Heather and I normally do this together, so I'm just trying to make sure I include everything. And I think, is anyone in here a teacher or work in the schools? Okay, there's been a lot of kind of confusion about the 50-50 division in English language arts class. The Common Core calls for, in English class, children to study, the text will be 50% informational and 50% creative literature. And there's this big debate because the Common Core says no. We just say children should be reading 50% informational text across all disciplines and that doesn't apply to the English class. But if you've seen any Common Core aligned English textbooks, they are 50% informational and they are 50% creative literature. So, and if you look at the Common Core standards, that's how they have the reading standards divided. There are 9 for literary text and there are 10 for informational text. And they say that, well, you need to really diminish, great classic works of literature and, have them read more informational text. And some of their examples are like, the EPA regulations or executive orders, foundational documents. And you'll say, well, I think kids should read foundational documents. I think that's an excellent thing to read. Well, it is. But should it be taught by an English teacher? No. It should be taught in history class with someone with the depth and the educational training to be able to teach it in a way that honors that document. That document is not for dissecting and literacy skills. It has a lot of meaning in it that needs to be taught in a different fashion than the Common Core calls for. So a lot of people are upset because we think that good classic literature is one of the bases of the American education system historically. I mean, that's how our children learn about history. That's how they learn about the human experience. And to cut that down and to make it more of a skills-based type thing is going to be very detrimental to our society. But they say, Common Core supporters say, well, kids need to do better in college, and kids in college read more informational texts in college. So since kids will be reading more informational text in college, they should read more in K through 12 so that they're better prepared. And while that kind of makes sense when you hear it, the studies are completely contradict that idea. There's actually an ACT study done that shows that college readiness increases with English curriculums that are heavy on complex literary text, laden with literary features that you can't find in informational text. You know, that which involves characters and literary devices and tone, ambiguity, elaborative structures, intricate language, and sort of unclear intentions. That's the kind of complex reading that allows children to develop more critical thinking. Those are the skills they need when they go to college. You know, deciphering the meaning of an epic poem such as Homer's, The Odyssey, you know, is much more difficult than deciphering the meaning of an autobiography. You know, informational text is to give you information. And in literary text, all of those things that I cited, it allows a child's mind to develop in a way that actually prepares them better to do college-level work. And that was done by the ACT, which is the ACT test for college entrance. And I'm just trying to get my way here. I'm sorry. Am I good on time? Okay. And I know, and someone else is going to do data collection. Is that right? Okay. Well, the data collection is another part. So through the park assessment, which I'm kind of hopeful we might not be in anymore. I think that through this legislation that was passed, it's at least postponed that park assessment I told you about that the federal government is funding that all students need to take. But the Common Core is more about standards. It's also about collecting data on the children. And the state, through these statewide longitudinal data systems, has built an infrastructure to do that. If we take the park assessment, in our contract, the state of Indiana signed a memorandum of understanding as a member of PARC, and that group has an agreement with the Department of Education that they will share all student data that is accumulated through the assessments. I think the actual wording is that they will have linkage to the Department of Education on an ongoing basis. So, you know, I think that's very, it's a violation of student privacy, amongst other things. And the national model, there's a national model that tells states what the Department of Ed wants as far as data. And there are over 400 points of data on it. They call them P20 systems, and people think that means pre-K till 20 years old to the workforce. It actually means prenatal. And I think that is frightening. They actually want to know your weight at birth. Were you early? What was your gestational weeks? Because they want all of that information to be able to predict how different programs will affect different children. And I personally think that it's none of their business. So that's where I'll stop. I don't want to do too much, and I can take questions afterwards if anyone is interested.
Thank you, Aaron, and we will have time for questions later, and I will touch a little bit more on the data and other areas. But in this area of news, if you happen to watch any news, or if you're lucky and haven't paid attention, but there's all this information about data mining that's been occurring throughout the nation by our federal government. So I think the timing of this discussion, along with the National Education Data Model, should maybe cause the hairs on the back of your neck to rise a little bit. So again, thank you, Aaron. Our next speaker is Glenna Yale. She's married to her husband, Steve, and is the mother of 5 children and 2 wonderful grandchildren. She works as a realtor in the Ollinger Associates for the last 10 years, and has been very active in pro-life and other conservative issues, serving as the former president of the Allen County Eagle Forum. Her volunteerism has followed her into the boards of SAFI and the Crossings, which are both educational based. And this past fall, Glenna, like myself, was elected to a school board. In her situation, it's the Fort Wayne Community Schools. She's going to talk a little bit about education reform in general and also public school impacts. And I'd like to welcome Glenna Yale to the podium, please.
Thank you, Kent. As he said, I have been active in the education issues starting in the 90s, early 90s, when outcome-based education was first unveiled. And what you have to understand is there's nothing new under the sun, okay? This education reform movement has been around for many, many decades, and I'm sure Jeannie can attest to that. But the progressives and the leftists have had an agenda to be able to create world citizens, not necessarily to achieve high educational achievement so that our kids will have a great foundation and become productive citizens. Their agenda has been quite different. And I didn't become aware of that until I got involved with Eagle Forum. They've been on the forefront of fighting this federal takeover of our schools for quite a while now. And back in the 90s, we were fighting the Goals 2000, which was, again, another federal program that was being mandated on our states and on our schools. And then also at that time, we were fighting the whole testing, the IPASS test that was being required. Each state was to come up with their own test. Well, we've gone through how many hundreds of millions of dollars of redoing these statewide tests, because we had the IPASS, then we had the I-STEP, and now I don't know how many versions of the I-STEP. And we were fighting at that time to not only retain local control, but to make sure that our kids had the foundations in reading, writing, arithmetic, so that when they did graduate, they would be able to either pursue a good career or to go on to college. Unfortunately, we lost those battles in the 80s. And I just want to point out to you two books. One is Not With My Child You Don't, and this is kind of by Robert Holland. This just kind of explains the battle that we came up against at that time when the education establishment was trying to force all this down our throat. But parents, again, like Aaron and like Heather, who were working with their children and seeing the type of work that their kids were coming home with, became concerned and alerted and rose up. So this kind of gives you the history of some of the battles that we went through back then. And then the other book I'm going to point out is by B.K. Eekman. It's called Educating for the New World Order. And what these two books will do is not only show you the strategies that they use, but also where they're going. Because really, it's not about can the kids read or write. It's will they become good workers who will fit into their idea of the New World Order. So when you hear the word education reform, we naturally think they're trying to improve education. They want our kids to learn more. Wrong. You have to look at it as they're going to take over your schools, and it's unconstitutional. There are laws on the book that prevent them from having a nationwide test. There are laws on the book that Congress has passed that prevent the federal government from having a national curriculum. Why? Because it's too dangerous. If you have the wrong person who's in control of the education establishment and they want to force that perspective on every child across this nation, that takes away parental rights, that takes away the ability for the local community to ensure that their schools are run properly and that the kids are getting that education that they need in order to become citizens and to function as productive individuals who can achieve their potential. So when you hear education reform, you have to think of elitists in Washington accountable to no one, who have an agenda. It's been around for a long time, and they're up to no good. Their idea of reform is, for instance, one of the goals that we talk about on Fort Wayne Community Schools, and let me say right here, I am speaking as a citizen. I am not speaking as a Fort Wayne Community School Board member. I have my own opinions, and this is some of the stuff that I've encountered over the years in battling this, the encroachment by the federal government into the school systems, and not necessarily speaking for Fort Wayne Community Schools or the board there. So just want to make that abundantly clear right from the beginning. So the schools talk about eliminating the achievement gap. That means certain segments of poverty are achieving at a lower level than kids maybe who come from a more normal or a background with more advantages. And so they want the achievement of the kids who are successful to be narrow the gap between the kids who struggle. And those kids struggle because they're coming from broken homes, and there's all kinds of problems within society because of the breakdown of the family. But the solution for them is not to help all students to achieve at the best possible level. Their solution is to bring down everybody so that we're equal. Well, that's a disastrous policy, because you can't have a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter policy or approach to education, which Common Core is. Because, first of all, we're all individuals. We all learn at a different speed. Boys are late bloomers. Girls catch on to some things sooner. My husband and I have total different approaches to things. He's more right brain, I'm more intuitive. So you can't just force that one style of learning on every child across America. It will be disastrous. And second of all, it takes away local control, and it takes away the teacher's abilities to assess what's going on in the classroom. If you have an experienced teacher, she can tell you within 2 weeks which kids are going to be challenges, which kids are behind, which kids are going to need more coaching, if you will, or more discipline or whatever. But with this new curriculum, they are going to be forced to come in and basically read a script, which means starting with good morning class and then going through that lesson plan. And then the lessons, or a lot of them, are going to be on computers. So guess what? Families are not going to be privy to everything their kids are exposed to. A lot of it's going to be online. As you are well aware, Fort Wayne Community Schools just went through a fiasco with the statewide testing. There were a lot of glitches. I don't know how you could run a statewide test and not actually have a dry run to make sure that all the schools would be able to take the test at the same time, or why you wouldn't, if you thought there might be a problem with capacity and servers, that you wouldn't rotate it around the schools, maybe do elementary on one day and middle school another day, and but nevertheless, this is what's upon us. Now all the tests have to be done on computers. As a school board member, I'm constantly having budget items brought before me where we have to buy new iPads, or we have to buy new laptops, we have to provide servers so that there's enough access for the computers. And then I got to go into some of the classrooms and see the types of things that the kids are working on with their new computers, which, if you want to believe that everything's hunky-dory and they have the best interests of your child in mind with all these new ideas, then you would be excited about what's happening. But what you don't understand is the mischief that they're up to is insidious. Just like Hillary Clinton had a national healthcare system in mind and pushed for it and worked for it along with Mark Tucker and never gave up. They implemented that while they were busy doing that, and everybody was focused on that. Obama had his people working on implementing this nationwide education takeover. And now that it's here, you have to understand that the people who are behind and designing these careers, like Bill Ayers, who is a radical Marxist, is going to be the one who's going to have a thumbprint on the type of curriculum your kids are going to be forced to master if they want to pass these tests. And you have to also understand that the brainwashing and the propaganda that they will be exposed to from the earliest classes, from kindergarten on, these kids are going to be taught how to resist the authority of their own parents, because they are going to be able to, through biometrics and monitoring their kids through the computer, they're going to be able to tell if they are teaching that homosexuality is a normal lifestyle and that kid resists because of his stance or because of his roll, he rolls his eyes or whatever biometric sensors that they have in place, they'll know that kid didn't get the lesson. And he will be sent for re-education training. And if you have 12 years of a vulnerable mind that has that beat into them, there's no chance. There's no chance those kids are going to be able to come out as an individual, free-thinking, and what that means for our society is this is going to be the enslavement of America, because this next generation is not going to have the opportunity to make those and form those opinions on their own. It's a very sobering and scary thing. So you can imagine my surprise when I was asked to run for school board, and I called a friend of mine, Pat Schneider, who is Eagle Forum past president and very knowledgeable of what's going on in education here in our state. And I said, Pat, just tell me what's going on in education, because while I was active back in the 90s fighting, the federal government's encroachment on education and finding out that, they're not testing knowledge, they're not testing objective knowledge. Can you tell me the right answer to this math problem, or can you answer this history question properly? They're testing subjective things and behavior because they want to mold. The whole idea is to mold society into the image they want to create. And so you can imagine my surprise when I found out that basically Common Core was in place. It had been adopted by Indiana, not just Indiana, 46 states across the nation signed on, sight unseen. It's like a bad nightmare, kind of like Obamacare, isn't it? You'll find out what's in it after it's passed, and then we're still finding out all the promises, all the lies, all the promises of how great it was going to be for everybody. Well, now we know it's going to cost everybody more money. We're not going to have the care that we had. Well, here we are with the education. It's already passed. And the two attempts that we've had in the last two legislatures to withdraw from it, we haven't been successful because Mitch Daniels and Tony Bennett had signed on to it, so a lot of the legislators wasn't aware of the problems with Common Core. In fact, nobody basically knows anything about Common Core, and yet every student in our state and every student in those other 46 states are going to be exposed to this. If if the standards really were higher, maybe you could justify it, giving that much power to the federal government, trusting Arne Duncan and Obama to really do what's right for our kids. But I don't know, it's kind of scary that we have very little opportunity now to put the genie back in the bottle. These guys have done a heroic job of sounding the alarm, and other groups like Judy's group has been out there sounding the alarm, but the hour is very late. And I talked to a friend of mine who had an opportunity to sit in on as a parent in a group of educators who were talking about the Common Core as it's being implemented in first grade, because here in our state, kindergarten, first grade have already implemented. Second grade was supposed to come online this year, but we kind of paused it. And then the rest of the grades were going to come online at the end of next year. That kind of got delayed while the legislature is holding some hearings. But unless there's just a massive uprising and people say, no, thank you, this is what we're going to get. And so I don't want to sound depressing. I want you to be aware. I want you to open your eyes that we can't just sit back and take all the slogans that you'll hear on the commercials. Like Exxon had a cute commercial about how wonderful Common Core is. They've got big money, and they've got marketing firms who can present their spin. What you're going to have to do is understand that it's here, it's dangerous, it's going to affect every child, because the Parks assessment, which is the state assessment gone national, okay, is also going to be tied into the SATs. So, and they're going to have a dossier, a portfolio on each child, and they're going to monitor those kids' progress. And when I say progress, it's not how well you know your ABCs. It's not do you know your multiplication tables. It's do you give the right answer about the economy and ecology and all these social issues, because they're creating citizens in their own image. So anyhow, thank you very much. But let me just say what I heard, for instance, in first grade. In first grade, they had implemented it, and the teachers all got together. Well, the teachers know what work and don't work, and what they are saying is, we're losing so many kids because the pace that everything is being shot at them, it's kind of like shotgun. There's no review. You have to just keep going with that curriculum because it's a set curriculum. And there's no deviation. So if in the past you were able to kind of set the slow learners aside and have the smarter kids work with them or whatever, you can't do that anymore. You just have to throw it out there. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. That means starting in first grade, we've already got kids who are failures, who are going to be behind, and there's no way for them to catch up because of this new way of doing education that Achieve and Obama have been bragging about. It's going to be detrimental to our kids. It's going to be detrimental to our freedoms, and it's going to wipe out local control. As a school board member, right now, we have very little say about the standards because they come from the state level and it's implemented that way. And if we disagree with what's being taught, we have no one to turn to. We would have to go to Washington and talk to someone in a private corporation who's not accountable, not elected, and try and convince them that what they've put into their curriculum isn't working. That's just a nightmare. So anyhow, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Glenda, for a passionate presentation today. And I want to echo a couple comments she made near the end. She's right. Our standards do come from the state, at least the standards we have today. And as parents, if you have concerns with those standards, you can go down to the Indiana State Board of Education and voice your concerns. As she says, we go to this Common Core. Where does that trip lead you to, and who do you get to speak to? Likewise, as a current school board member, our own school systems put together our own curriculum. And our curriculum teaches beyond those standards in most cases, and we're able to follow those. But the new standards that have come out say that you cannot teach more than 15% beyond the standards. And in many cases, I know of some school systems here in Allen County who have adopted these predefined, maybe Pearson puts together a predefined curriculum, that are Common Core compliant. So maybe we might go forward and do our own curriculum, but you can sure bet we're going to get the thousands and thousands of pages of paperwork to justify that our curriculum is still meeting those standards. So it's that passive-aggressive behavior of, sure, you can have your coverage, but you really can't have your coverage. You can really have your own curriculum, but we're going to force you to adopt and acquiesce to the other standards. So it is frightening to think about. Our next speaker, as I see a lot of faces from the church in here, the next speaker probably doesn't need introduction to any of those folks, but some of the NICC folks aren't familiar. Dr. Jeannie Zaire has worked as a teacher and administrator in East Allen County Schools for 35 years before becoming to Central Christian School as the principal in 2010. She now serves in a broader community as the Director of the Community Impact for the United Way of Allen County. Her personal passion is providing training to adults, parents, and educators in the foresting program. I should have asked you before how to pronounce that one. And a method for developing the God-given ability to grow our critical thinking skills. She and her husband, Rick, are the proud parents of 2 married children and 4 wonderful grandchildren. Let's welcome Jeannie Zare to the podium to talk about Common Core and its impact on private schools. Thank you, Jeannie.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you, both of you, for a great introduction to this very controversial and hot topic. I decided to divide my remarks into 2 parts, good news and bad news. My good news is pretty short, but I've got some. I had the honor to serve here as the principal at Central Christian School after having given 35 years in the public school. And I want children, whether they are homeschooled, privately schooled, a Catholic school, I want them to succeed. I want all of our children in America to succeed. And so I worked very hard in the public sector to do that. I used to tell people I'm a Christian disguised. I'm a Christian disguised as a public school administrator. So I was able to be a principal when No Child Left Behind came into being, and I cannot tell you the enormous amount of pressure that high-stakes testing puts upon teachers and children and administrators. I still tell the story about the first year that I packed up those I-step tests in a box at an elementary school in East Allen and prayed over them because of the tremendous pressure there is on succeeding. So let me start with some good news, okay? The good news is we live in Indiana. Do you know that that's a good thing? You do, good. I will not go into great detail on how beautiful this state is. My husband and I travel a lot around the world as well as in the United States, and I love to come home, Senator Kruse, to Indiana. We have choice scholarships in place. There are right now 301 accredited schools. There will be more by the fall. I have the list with me. In fact, I have several documents straight off of the Indiana Department of Ed's website concerning the choice scholarships. If you would like any information, I've got some documents here I can share with you. Last year, 9,300 students participated with a choice scholarship. On May 9th, House Bill 1003 was passed, which allows now siblings to automatically, if their income qualifies, that they may now qualify for a choice scholarship, also known as school vouchers. The new cap was moved up to $4,700. The private schools do not get as much money as public schools do. That's kind of I've heard some misinformation going on with that. We have to do the same job with a lot less money than the public schools in Christian schools. But repeatedly, it's found that we do the job quite well with much less money. And because of that, just a few weeks ago, it was announced $5 million could be returned to the public schools because that much money was saved on the 9,300 students who attended a Christian school. Does that make sense? Because it costs less money. Good news in the Christian schools. Curriculum is not dictated by Indiana or Common Core state standards, but we must be accredited by the state of Indiana, and I have a beautiful document here that explains this is the application to become accredited. And on page 2, there's a list of things that we actually had to go out and purchase. We didn't have everything that was required here. There's a list of 15 documents that must be in your library to be accredited in the state of Indiana. You must have the Constitution of the United States. You must have the national model, the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, the Constitution of the state of Indiana, the Declaration of Independence, the Mayflower Compact, and there's 8 more. Those documents must all be on the premises of an accredited school in Indiana. I don't know if that's true across our nation. That'd be a great research study to do. Also, an eligible school must require that each teacher has special emphasis on honesty, morality, courtesy, obedience to law, respect for the national flag and the Constitution of the United States and Indiana, respect for parents and home. Praise God, I live in Indiana. You could read that list if you'd like to see more of what was required of us to seek accreditation here at Central Christian School. So back to the curriculum is not dictated by Indiana or Common Core state standards, and I would love to know in Northwest Allen and in East Allen, or if this is a state policy, but in Fort Wayne, in East Allen, we required a parent sit on the curriculum team every year a new curriculum is chosen, say language arts for the whole district. A parent had to sit on the team. And so if your school districts don't have that, the public school districts, that's something that I would highly recommend that be enforced, because some school districts maybe have it and they're not pushing for it to make sure there's a parent sitting on that curriculum team. The standards set a bar, and you've heard great evidence that indicates that bar isn't very high. And at the Christian school, we have not heard that we have to stay only 15% beyond that. So I think the Christian schools will be much safer with being able to teach much higher than what the bar has been set. Religious instruction is in no way banned or reviewed in any way by the state of Indiana or the Department of Ed, even though we're accredited. Praise God, I live in Indiana. Quality Christian schools do ensure that teachers provide a biblical worldview. The Christian schools that I have worked with, and I've worked with many in this area, are very adamant about their teachers, making sure that children receive information from the world as well as from their curriculum through a biblical worldview. The other good piece of news is, I would say, we have phenomenal traditional family values in Indiana. Would much rather raise my children here than on the coasts of our nation, which seem to have some other sets of values. Ready for bad news? Okay, you've heard a lot of it already. The Common Core state standards will drive curriculum. There are billions of dollars tied up in selling curriculum. When I'm on my Google, do you notice the ads that pop up in the right-hand column? They're looking to see what you've put in an email or a subject line. And if you put in anything in your emails that sound like curriculum or education, then you're going to get ads from Pearson and all these other places. Here's where you can buy your Common Core state standards aligned lesson books. And teachers are snapping them up because they're terrified that they've got to teach to these standards. So it's a huge billion-dollar business. The standards beg for high-stakes testing, and those cause tremendous angst in private and public schools. I've already spoken to that. So much angst that cheating on the high-stakes testing across our nation was investigated last year in 40 states. Some of this was done at the State Department level. It wasn't like one teacher in a classroom. That was what happened in Atlanta, Georgia. They had to go in and investigate people at the Department of Ed for cheating. Of the 40 states that did these investigations, 33, there was found explicit cheating on these high-stakes testing. We do ignore the high-achieving nations that use no high-stakes testing at all, let alone a national standards or curriculum. And we need to pay a little more attention. McGraw-Hill, you've heard about the I-STEP fiasco. Have you followed a little bit of that this year, this spring? This is a nightmare. $95 million was paid to McGraw-Hill to run our I-STEP testing in Indiana, and no one noticed they didn't have enough servers. Just an interesting dilemma. These numbers I heard anecdotally. These were not official. I just want you to know I heard these numbers. Don't write them down or take them to the bank. But about 10,000 students were tested in Fort Wayne Community Schools. The IDOE reported back to them, we have 1,500 that we think there were testing glitches. So 1,500 kids we'll look into to see if their tests would be valid or not. Do you know what the teachers reported? 5,800 compared to 1,500 that the State Department said they noticed. And so that's kind of scary. Indiana, I hope, will choose not to go with Park. the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, a wonderful title, sounding title. It is federally funded and contracted to conduct these high-stakes tests. And this grew out of the No Child Left Behind we have all seen what happened with that. I lived through being a principal without No Child Left Behind and then being a principal with it. And I saw what it did was narrow the curriculum. All of a sudden, I took over a school and the teacher said, well, we don't teach science and social studies. I said, you're kidding me, because that's what kids love. Kids love maps, kids love geography, kids love science. You're telling me you don't teach that? No, because it's not on the ISTEP test. So we only teach math, and so I had to bring back science and social studies to that school. That was back in like 12, 13 years ago. And we've seen across the nation that our schools in poverty, where children need the enrichment of science and social studies and music and art and PE, we need that to have a truly well-rounded child's education, has been cut and narrowed because we have to spend all of our time getting ready for the test. I'm not a big fan of high-stakes testing, if you haven't picked that up yet. Park provides more tests, 5 a year. 5. More time. A third grader will need to spend 8 hours online taking his Park test. More technology dollars that Glenna spoke about. Got to buy more and more computers. This will be very tough. This will be bad news for Christian Ed. We do not have extra dollars. I have never before in my lifetime been more impressed with a bunch of teachers than when I took over Central Christian, and they never came and asked me for money. When I was a public school principal, it was every day. A teacher was knocking on the door. Gee, you need to buy this, need to buy that, need to buy that. My Christian Ed teachers never asked for anything. They paid for it out of their own pocket, or they knew we'd have to have a bake sale to raise it anyway. So they didn't ask. So this will be a tremendous burden for our private schools to come up with enough technology dollars if we adopt Park. Choice scholarships may only be used at accredited private schools that keep at least a grade C on the A to F grading system that's in place. Glinda Ritz, our new superintendent of instruction, has suggested a little easier model that could be understood. Right now it's an extremely complicated formula, how your school gets that grade. Very difficult to understand or explain to parents. Some more bad news. That a federally funded test could determine whether a child in first grade in Allen County can attend a private school or not, because that choice scholarship is depending upon a grade, it's depending upon a test that has been determined by an organization in Washington, D.C. This is a far reach of the federal government that certainly is beyond the 10th Amendment. And my closing remark would be, federalization of any program reduces quality, efficiency, and invites corruption, as our recent Washington scandals indicate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaire. Our next speaker is Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak. Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak is the daughter of a godly immigrant who grew up in the war zone in the Balkans. Dawn's mother lived under communism, socialism, and Hitler's Third Reich. Dawn is also the mother of an immigrant, as well as her precious daughter is a save from Eastern Europe. Dawn has an undergraduate degree in biology and a doctorate in optometry, specializing in neurobiology. So much for the science classes, right? Dawn did her residency at West Point Military Academy and has been in private practice of optometry for the past 20 years. Dawn is also an author, homeschool mom, speaker, teacher, and lifelong student. Like many of you, Dawn recognizes that you never really learn anything until you must try to teach it to another, and will be accountable for those results. Dawn and her husband, Jim, are privileged to prepare their daughter to be a godly thinker in her generation, and this is why they've chosen to homeschool their daughter. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak.
You know, we all come with some presuppositions, myself included. So let's lay aside some misconceptions about homeschoolers. For starters, we are not common. Families that have chosen to homeschool their children come from a multitude of diverse backgrounds and often convoluted paths, such as having an extremely gifted child, having a child with developmental delays, having an adopted child. These could all be in the same child. Or it could be from parents who themselves were homeschooled, parents who had personally struggled in their own public education experience, or actually parents who teach in the public education system, who are acutely aware of the realities it entails, and they have intentionally chosen to homeschool their own children. But more and more, the motivation is the children themselves. They are asking to be homeschooled. Increasingly, children who have experienced public education are requesting to be homeschooled or to attend a private school. Let's face it, children are perceptive. They're intuitive. They have a survival instinct. They may not have fully developed frontal lobes, but they operate out of a sheer desire to feel safe and secure. Children today sense the conflict, the chaos, the confusion, and the contradictions in every sector of our nation. We live in a nation struggling with an identity crisis, brought about by decades of amnesia regarding our true foundations. Homeschooling families recognize these foundations and are laboring to provide the stability their children need in order to learn. Homeschoolers are not common, and like many of you, we're not about producing common widgets. Homeschoolers employ a multitude of modes of learning, such that in reality, we do not sit at home. 4% of children K through 12 are now homeschooled. This number has more than doubled over the last 15 years in the United States. Homeschoolers are not common, and we're not huge in numbers. And that being the case, we have been able to avoid, and purposely choose to avoid, the radar. Homeschoolers are keenly aware of the education patterns in Europe, which have consistently acted to oppose homeschooling. Children are deemed wards of the state in many socialist and communist nations. As you've heard, both my mother and my daughter have immigrated from European nations that practice both communism and socialism, my mother under fascism of Hitler as well. Our family has seen first-person what centralized education does to nations, which is why we personally are involved in this battle for minding the minds and the souls of Americans. What is common among homeschoolers is the understanding that we, as parents, are responsible for the physical, emotional, spiritual, and academic development of our children. For the majority of homeschoolers, our content and processes are based on absolute truths of knowledge, because the majority of homeschoolers possess, as Jeannie mentioned, a biblical worldview. We are intentional about equipping our children with the cognitive thinking skills and criteria by which to discern, so that our children will become autonomous thinkers, successful in maintaining their unique identities as they become leaders in shaping the future, not just followers in a common core. So why are homeschoolers willing to enter the radar? We all recognize the common threat to our culture via Common Core, shaping the thought of future generations. But how does Common Core pose a personal threat to homeschoolers? Homeschoolers have traditionally scored extremely high on standardized achievement tests. Numerous studies show that homeschoolers perform 30 to 37 percentile points higher than public school peers. Colleges, universities, and academies actively seek out homeschooled students, as homeschooled students consistently maintain higher grade point averages and complete their degrees at higher rates than non-homeschooled students. Homeschoolers partake in a seemingly infinite number of endeavors, which I know Jeannie's kids did here too, from community service, dance to drama, equine to economics, civics, logic to languages, and cross-cultural international trips, and athletics on every turf, course, court, and arena. Homeschoolers are self-starters, autonomous thinkers, and excellent achievers. They are uncommon individuals. The common threat. As standardized achievement tests are now being written to align with Common Core standards, incorporating the ideologies and unproven methods of affective math, social justice literature, which actually that's been pretty effective, Humanistic evolution, redefining life, marriage, family, sexuality, and history. These progressive ideologies are in direct opposition to the core values upon which most homeschoolers base their lives and the education of their children. Since the College Board is altering the standardized test of collegiate admission, the SAT, the ACT, as well as the Stanford 10 and the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, which many private schools and homeschoolers use. Here in Fort Wayne, the homeschoolers just took the Stanford 10 3 weeks ago. Homeschoolers face the very real possibility of being ill-prepared to play the "it's all relative, teach to the test" game that is all too familiar for those in government education. And these lower assessment scores and nonconformist attitudes, as Glenna mentioned, they will notice about our kids, will very likely affect the acceptance of homeschooling graduates to colleges and universities aligned with the college accreditation boards. Now this creates a very real disequilibrium. And since homeschoolers are not common, homeschoolers may choose not to play the game as they find themselves threatened by this very real tyranny over education. A tyranny in which nationalization of education removes parental choice and replaces it with Common Core dictated ideologies that will form the worldview of all children. All education is religious in that it conveys a worldview. These ideologies are not new, yet centralization of the dissemination threatens the very existence of our constitutional republic. Common Core and its tentacles is a clear usurpation of the parental rights and the rights of our children as unique individuals to determine their own educational and career paths. Homeschoolers have entered the radar to unite with all parents, educators, and patriotic Americans against a common foe. Common Core, its databases, and its plethora of invasive satellites. To paraphrase a mentor of ours, an internationally renowned doctor of cognitive psychology, Professor Reuven Feuerstein, parents and educators ought to be more focused on creating intelligence rather than measuring it. This is the underlying mindset of homeschooling, a growth mindset, creating intelligence in individuals rather than cataloging, confining, and controlling via a common core.
Thank you very much, Dawn. We've been sitting for about 1 hour, and I've been on that side of it, and today I've been able to hop up and down, but I know you guys all been patiently sitting there. So why don't we all just stand up, stretch our legs for like 2 minutes, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the, we're on the home stretch here, everyone, but. Yeah. Oh, you do? What school do you go? Oh, really? What grades? Okay, I have a first grader and a third grader. Yeah, so both girls are out there somewhere. Someone's running around with them. So yeah. I do some stuff with my kids' classes, but yeah. So when I'm in there, I know a lot of the names of kids. But if they didn't have anybody in first or third grade, it just doesn't. Oh, is it? Yeah. Well, there's some pluses and minuses. Don't get me wrong. My view of it is, we were a small rural school that is now growing. We have got to make sure we meet let's put it this way, the values that the small school first had, but handle it professionally in that volume we have now as a large school corporation. And so sometimes you have to weigh maybe strictness with leniency, and where do you hold it? Yep. Christy Thomas. Oh, okay. I saw you there too. My father goes for my daughters. Yes, he was. Yes. Put your hand up. Well, the thing about it is, you ought to find some time that they're going to have a cougar celebration, they call it, and go see those kids have fun because they're singing and they're having a good time before the event, and then they go forward. So yeah, that's wonderful. Well, good. I'm glad that's good to know. All right, if we could find our way back to our seats. I need. Okay. We're gonna start back up here in a few seconds. Try to be polite. I'm gonna do about 4 minutes, Dennis. I mean, real quick. It should not be long. It's okay. I'm going to take a few minutes here and talk a little bit about the data mining, data modeling that was mentioned earlier. One of the most interesting things when I was starting to look into this was what information is already shared about our students' education. And I found out that, and as I said before, I have 2 elementary-age daughters. They are to the state of Indiana, they are nothing more than a sterilized, unique identifier number in the state, and a score, and a school. That's the extent of it. The link to tie that unique number back to either one of my daughters resides in our school system. Actually, not in our school system, it lies within the school itself, specifically where they are attending. So all this detailed information is housed at the school, which is necessary for the school to do its business as an educational institute. And the state gets its information. What do they do on their scores? How are they progressing? The National Education Data Model is information that most of your current schools don't even carry that detail of information. Sure, a key carries and it lists out the name and the address, social security number, some of those common informational items, and bus stop number and times. But you need to ask yourself, why do we need to be sharing the information with the national information on what does that do with my timing? Well, someone will say is maybe if your child rides the bus longer. Okay, let's stop right there. Your disciplinary reviews, obviously you must keep those at the school, but what does the national information collection need to have that type of information? But now it starts to get even more nefarious from my perspective. What is their religious affiliation? What's their medical history where they've maybe missed a half a day of school and what was the outcome? Who was their health care provider? What insurance did they use? How much money do your parents make? What's the voting records? Do they vote? Those type of items. There's 400 plus data elements in this national data model. Now, in preparation for today's meeting, I actually went out to that national data model website. It's on our federal government website. You can go look at it. And something that's new that maybe you haven't seen, now in bright red letters, is a statement that says, this is a model to offer to schools so that they can develop useful and complete data capturing tools. Great. And then a little on you can read, and the use of common terminology and structures allow the sharing of information. Red flag, right? The sharing of information. So as a school board member, as I mentioned before, one of the things we're looking into is our data privacy issues. I've also brought up with Senator Kruse and other representatives, we need to look for ways to protect the data of our individual students. There is no one in Washington, D.C., I can trust you at this moment, there's not one person in Washington, D.C. who can come up with the right educational plan for either one of my children. The person making those decisions are the teachers that see my child every single day, that see her more than a number, that see her more than a test score, that see her more than what time she gets up on the bus and what time she leaves school each day, what her extracurricular activities are. It's the teacher who sees how she learns, the principal who might be able to assess that, help that teacher. That's where our education development and tracking should reside. More importantly, in Northwest Allen, we use a test, a longitudinal test called NWEA. I think a lot of schools do that. And it is not a high-stakes test. It is to measure your progress, and we test 3 times a year. I believe, Dr. Zare, you mentioned, or somebody, that Common Core will be 5 times a year. The one test that we find the most useful in developing educational patterns and structure for each and individual students is the NWEA, and it's probably the one that gets the least attention anywhere else. And so unfortunately, we may end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater as we go forward with this. So just the concept of this data privacy, and as parents, losing that privacy is something you should all be quite alarmed from. Another thing to pay attention to is there is a federal law. It's pronounced FERPA. I believe it stands for Federal Education Reporting Privacy Act. It was recently amended. The recent amendments were done through administrative practice and not through the legislature. And they changed non-private information to include things like fingerprints, retinal scans, other biological history of your children. Again, that is extremely private information that I cannot get on my own wife unless she signs a HIPAA release form. So I don't understand why our federal government feels the need for this information. So in closing, I think we need to make sure we pay very close attention to what information gets shared, how it's getting shared, and demand to understand that your children's information is kept private and under the control of the individual parents. Now, that was all I had to talk about for this issue, and now leading to our keynote speaker, Indiana Senator Dennis Kruse. Senator Kruse has been married to his lovely wife, Kay, for the past 44 years. They are the proud parents of 4 married sons. I always have a problem with this because I start saying Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but it's Matthew, John, Timothy, and Daniel. Currently, they have 3 grandsons, and as I understand, they're excited to have 3 additional grandchildren due yet later this year. So I believe the Kruse household will be a busy one at Christmas time. They have attended the County Line Church of God for 40 years, where Dennis has served as a Sunday school teacher. He and his family lived just north of Leo, Indiana, since 1963. Is that correct? You had 83, but okay. Wow, wonderful. Senator Kruse started his public service as a township trustee in the early 1980s. In '89, he was elected to the Indiana House of Representatives, where he served the residents of DeKalb County for the next 16 years. In 2004, Kruse switched legislative chambers when he became a member of the Senate, where he serves today. Currently, Senator Kruse is the chairman of the Senate Education and Career Development Committee and was instrumental in passing legislation that requires the review and further study of Common Core here in the state of Indiana. Please welcome Dennis Kruse.
Thank you. It's my honor and privilege to be here with you today, and I appreciate your concern about our education system in America, because I believe that if you think Obamacare is socialistic in our United States of America, Common Core, in my opinion, will be the biggest socialism program that America has ever seen in our history. I am one of the persons in a key position in our state government to be able to try to halt the Common Core being implemented here in our state, and it was a battle just to get a pause for 1 year, and we almost didn't get that. So Common Core is ingrained in many facets of the government and in our school system. So I would say, well, right now, 90-some% of the people are bought into Common Core in the whole United States. So we have a remnant that was started here by Aaron and Heather in Indiana to begin to draw our attention to some things that are not good about Common Core. And they have educated me greatly over the last year and a half that I've met with them several times. And I appreciate the knowledge that they have given to me in my position as chairman of the Indiana Senate Education Committee. I'm going to review what the new law is. It's under a bill called 1427. It was a House bill. Rhonda Rhodes from Southern Indiana was the author in the House. It was various education matters. Probably has 30 or 40 different education matters. It's one of these omnibus bills We had two of them this time that were kind of various education matters. This was one of them. We had a bill on Common Core in the Senate that passed the Senate, but the chairman of the House Education Committee, Bob Baining, would not give it a hearing. So in Indiana government and other state governments, committee chairmen decide if bills get hearings or not. So any committee chairman at any given time can stop a bill from progressing by not giving it a hearing. So he did not give it a hearing, so our Senate bill that passed was dead on arrival at the House of Representatives. So that happened for the second round of our legislative session. The last 2 weeks of the session, we have the reconciliation of House bills and Senate bills that have different wording in them, or to come together and try to iron out those differences, or if one bill passed one House, the Senate or the House, and didn't pass the other one, that language is eligible to be inserted into a conference committee report the last 2 weeks. So our goal was to get this Senate language that we passed into a conference committee report. So it ended up being 1427. You have to have a bill that has the same category of knowledge in it. We call it germaneness in the legislature, so it has to be of like nature. So we only had a couple of options. Those two various education bills, really, 2 and 1427, ended up being the one that we picked because Rhonda Rhodes, who is the House author and also vice chairman of the House Education Committee, was with us on the Common Core language. She wanted to pause, so we picked her bill to put the Common Core language in the conference committee. We were successful, and I will say, down to the last 3 hours of the session, it was ready to fall apart, and we would have had nothing. But as God works out in the affairs of men, it came together, and we were able to get it passed. So I think we were the first state in the United States to have what I think is a comprehensive pause on Common Core. Other states have taken a little bit different position since ours. Michigan and a few other states have passed some things since we have. But the whole United States was really looking at what Indiana was going to do on Common Core, because Tony Bennett, who was one of the biggest proponents and one of the board members, one of the school chiefs to instigate Common Core in America, was the Indiana Superintendent of Public Instruction. So that made people look at Indiana, I think, more than some of the other states. So what we have now is that we have a bill that is now signed into law that says that the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Glenda Ritz, was to issue a memo, which she did by May 15th, to the school corporations to tell them to halt any further progress of Common Core in the state. So whatever school corporation had in place stays in place, except for second grade. They can implement second grade. So kindergarten, first and second grade can be implemented with Common Core, and if you had not done any more than that, then you can't move ahead with any Common Core standards or curriculum in those school corporations in Indiana. Another thing that we did, no one had really studied the financial impact of Common Core in the state of Indiana, so part of this law says that our Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, that's under the governor's jurisdiction, that they have to study the cost of Common Core being implemented or not being implemented, which I think is good to study both sides of it and to see what the cost of Common Core. They have to finish that study by the end of September this year. And we have another committee that was part of 1427, is the Legislative Study Committee on Common Core. They are planning on meeting 3 times. As I reread the law, I don't think it specifies that the legislature has to meet 3 times, but the idea right now is that we would have 3 public meetings on Common Core. We wanted those around the state. Initially, we wanted 1 in every congressional district all around the state, but we couldn't get that agreement in the final conference committee report. So, and we can have them now wherever the committee chairman decide. And Bob Baining, if he is one of those people, he wants all 3 in Indianapolis. He doesn't want to go outside and get the other part of the state to give input. So we'll just have to fight that out and see what happens on the location. But at least we have to have 3 public meetings. Then also part of this is that the State Board of Education, which did have public meetings on Common Core when they passed it, their meetings are open to the public, but it really wasn't promoted. Very few people attended, very few people knew about it. So they are now required to host 3 public meetings on Common Core by the end of next year. They would have to have theirs done before July 1st of 2014. After July 1 of 2014, then the State Board of Education will be required to take another vote whether or not they want to proceed ahead with Common Core in Indiana or not. Our state's history, as far as anybody can go back, the State Board of Education has been in charge of setting academic standards in our state. So that's the group, and they're appointed by the governor. They're not elected in Indiana. Some states they are. Here they're appointed. So the governor kind of makes the decision on who is on that State Board of Education and what they think about different things. Mitch Daniels and Tony Bennett were both very much pushing Common Core. So Governor Daniels appointed people to the State Board of Education that were very friendly to Common Core. So their vote was 10-0 in favor of Common Core. So we just had announcement as recent as yesterday. The announcement came out because these things are good that we're doing here. But the final analysis is July 1, 2014, when the State Board of Education takes another vote. That vote is what's going to count whether or not Common Core moves forward. The other things are going to give us information, public input, but really the State Board of Education is still going to make that final decision. So there were 6 of the 10 members up for reappointment now, July 1st. The governor chose to make his appointments yesterday, and he announced them. I was actually with him at the Brunswick announcement, so they're expanding the Harris float boat factor here in the Fort Wayne area, and his 6 new members actually are not all new. 2 of them are carryover of the 10. So if you have 4 who voted for it already, who are staying on, and then you have 2 that were up, of the 6 that were up, were reappointed, that makes 6. So really, even with Governor Pence himself does not like Common Core. And he voted against. He was one of 5 Republican congressmen who voted against No Child Left Behind, against a lot of pressure by George W. Bush and his staff and his leaders. So he doesn't like the education coming from Washington, D.C. at all. But he still reappointed 2 of those people. And then the 4 new ones he appointed, I think, will probably not vote in favor of Common Core. So there was a kindergarten teacher and a college president were the 2 that he reappointed. So those 2 people will make a key difference next July on if we're going to continue Common Core or not. So that gives you the essence of the law that we have now. I am a huge proponent, and so is Governor Pence, of eliminating the Department of Education in the United States federal government. The United States Constitution says nothing about education. All the states' Constitution says we are in charge of education. We're charged in our constitutions to take care of education in the state government. And we are so far out of the original intent of our founding is just unreal. And to even talk about billions of billions, how many billions did you say?
It's a $500 billion industry a year.
$500 billion industry having more and more control from the federal government is a disaster for us as individual freedom-believing Americans and here in Hoosier land. And I do not want the federal government involved in education, and I want to eliminate that, do away with that as much and as fast as I can in my position, whatever I can do at any point in time. And we want to be able to have you to be able to have some input here. You've heard from several of us here for quite some time, and Ken will come back up, and he'll give you opportunity then for having questions and answers. But I thank you for being involved, because if you are not involved, I don't know, there aren't very many other groups in the state that are going to get involved like you are. So the 912 Tea Party group is probably one of our great hopes in keeping this issue alive and convincing more and more people that Common Core is not good. So I want to thank you for your involvement and for being here today. Thank you very much.
I just want to follow up on something he said about Governor Pence. If you've heard anything here today that has made you mad, when you get in your car and you leave, pick up your phone and call Governor Pence's office. And you need to tell him that the Board of Education that he appoints and the decisions that they make reflect on him. And if he is against the Common Core, then he needs to make sure that his board that serves at his pleasure votes to not adopt Common Core. And you tell him you're upset that he appointed reappointed two members to the board who have not once, not twice, but 3 times voted in support of Common Core. If he's not for Common Core, why are they still there? So if there's anything that you do today, you call him and tell him you want him to publicly state how his board appointments reflect in a way that will end Common Core. We need to hear from him. If there's something we don't know and he's spoken with those board members and they have had a change of heart, I think we need to, have that be made. Thank you. I can never get off my...
Thanks, Senator Kruse and Aaron, for those comments. We're going to get a traveling microphone set up here. Steve in the back will be walking around bringing a microphone up, and I think we're going to also have one up here. We're going to rearrange up here in a few minutes. For some of you that haven't seen, there is a website, Heather. It's HoosersAgainstCommonCore.org.com. If you want to see some very interesting stories and examples, I would suggest you go to that website again. It's HoosersAgainstCommonCore.com. Okay? True.
And you can link to our website. Well, actually, we have a link to Truth in American Education as well, and they have a link to us. So either one. Truth in American Education is kind of a clearinghouse nationally, and they have all the information on all the states. It's wonderful.
The one example I want to use, and this was, there's a video out there of a person looking at adopted, I believe it was Pearson or McGraw, one of the publishers, Common Core centric or aligned English for first graders. And if you go through that, you'll find it quite chilling because it's talking about writing in emotions. And the prime example they used was using phrases like writing angry or sad, and pushing out discussions like this on issues that are social in nature. There was an interesting question and answer they had, I believe, in the 3rd grade. It's a fill in the blank. So I suggest parents make sure you are looking at your students' homework. It said, my mother blanks me about cleaning my room. 2 choices the student had was asks me to clean my room, nags me to clean my room. The correct answer is nags, according to this. The marginalization of parents, and again, you always don't want to think this stuff, but as Glenn had brought up, this concept of marginalizing the parents and bringing down the influence of the parents on their individual children is almost, well, I guess I won't say it's subliminal, it's pretty overt in this example there. Now, I guarantee you my mom did nag me, but the answer correct is you were asked to clean your room. Likewise, simple mathematics, the multiplication of 2 numbers. I suggest you look at the section called fuzzy math. I have a degree in mathematics and received a Distinguished Math Honor Award from Purdue University, so I think I know a little bit about numbers. And it took me forever to understand why, if you're multiplying 2 numbers, you don't take the 1 times this, you do the carryover, and you multiply that and put it down, then you do the next one, add them up, and add up the column. I mean, we all did that. We remember we shift everything over. The exercise that they're showing our children, and they won't teach that method of doing multiplication until 5th grade. You're going to come up and multiply, well, let's multiply the numbers in the tens. So if you were taking 27 times 85, you would take 20 times 80 and then put that number down. Then you would take the 5 times 20 and you'd write that number down. And you take the 7 times the 80 and write that number down. And you take the 5 times the 7 and write that number down. Then add up all 4 numbers. Well, as you know, the time I actually said that, I'm sure 5 or 6 of you out here did the calculation in your head and already had the answer. So likewise, there's a big scare on how we're teaching our kids. It's not so much It's how to answer the questions. One of the examples that I think brought Heather's has brought to bear was one of her daughter's homework assignment was there are two bridges. One measures 412 feet and one measures 380 feet. Which one is longer and why? Well, 412 is longer than 380. That's the answer. No, that's not the right answer. See, you look at the hundreds column, because the hundreds column, that's exactly how they're teaching our children to do mathematics. So you should be very afraid of what's out there today. So with that, what we're going to do is, Steve, why don't you give that microphone to Dennis Kruse and grab that one. And would you take that one and find somebody in the crowd that might have a question, and we'll, grab that one off the podium there.
While you do that, I want to
Sure.
further. I forgot some important things when I was talking earlier, but he just reminded me. When he talks about these different methods of how they have to answer the question, that's how they're going to be testing it on the PARC test that all the students will have to take, that all your school accountability and your teacher evaluations will be tied to. That's why it drives curriculum. When they say the Common Core is just a set of standards and teachers can teach how they want to teach it, they can't. Because when you're held accountable to a test that has that method of mathematics of doing that addition or the multiplication on it, and they don't answer it in their way, that child doesn't get it right. The correct answer is not enough, and they will do that on the PARC assessment. So that's how Common Core drives curriculum in the classroom. Thank you.
Hello. My question is directed, I think, to Glenna. Probably would be best suited to answer my question. And my question is, what about the Fort Wayne Community School Boards? Over here. Over here, Glenna. Fort Wayne Community School Board, I was just curious as to whether any of the other members of the board are expressing concern about Common Core. I know I would like to hear maybe from Kent what some of the Northwest Allen County School Board members are saying. I know that there's no official position, I know, but is anybody raising a concern?
Okay. Like I said, this came in under the radar screen. But even if it had been something that had been discussed openly and voted for, because our school district went ahead and applied for the Race to the Top monies that was dangled in front of them, they made a commitment to Common Core. And any cash-strapped school district wasn't going to examine what they had signed on to. They're just like, man, I hope we get that grant because we could use the money. And so at that point, when they made those commitments to Common Core, they hadn't been written and they still haven't been tested. These are unproven methods and standards that they've sprung on us, and we're supposed to just trust that they are going to raise achievement in our schools. But the other problem is the alignment of the board. Most of the board members have been there a long time, and they are all in agreement with the direction leaning to the left, in other words, more progressive than myself. But Lisa Olinger, who is also one of our Fort Wayne Community School Board members, is aware of the problems with Common Core. I think there's just a vacuum of information about what it really is, because all that most of us get about Common Core is, because it's already adopted, of course, it's positive. And so we only get the lines that this is going to help with deeper thinking. Well, if you remember back in the day when we were fighting outcome-based education, they were talking about higher order thinking skills and critical thinking. And this is just another buzzword to convince teachers and educators that the kids are going to get more out of education. You have to understand the climate in the school system is very controlled. So the teachers, while they're just doing all they can to keep up with all the change, between the change in the grading system, the constant testing. Now they're being monitored to make sure they're teaching correctly. Now their pay is going to be affected by how the kids do. All these things are new. So what we're finding is there's going to be a huge turnover in teachers because there's a lot of stress, and some of them have decided, okay, I'm used to teaching this way, and now we've got to go in this whole different direction. And they're just, they're just tired. I think the teachers are overwhelmed. They're trying to do their best, but nobody understands the ramifications of what we've signed on to. And by the time we finally catch on, it'll be too late. The system will be in place. And once the system is in place, that's where we're going to really reap the whirlwind, because we've already seen and are reaping the 30 or more, 40, 50 years of the humanistic, progressive education. And that's why we have a crisis. Surprise, we've been instituting these methods of teaching that don't work, and we're falling further behind the rest of the world as a result, because we've gone into the affective testing for behaviors rather than imparting knowledge and achievement.
And really, the Common Core reduces any type of power of the elected school board. I mean, it's a shift of power away from, your representatives to a central body. I mean, the local school boards, when Common Core goes further down the line, I mean, they already have very limited power. I mean, they take orders. And you know what I'm saying? Their effect on influencing education is minimal today and will continue to almost be zero. They're regionalizing it, away from where a parent, when I didn't honestly, I'm here, my children go to a small Catholic school. And because we take the vouchers, and the voucher law requires us to take the park assessment, the whole curriculum radically different. From my daughter 2 years before was in 3rd grade. My son, 2011, he was in 3rd grade. The difference in the math was just, you couldn't even recognize it. So I didn't like it. So I went to my principal. Hey, what's going on? Are we making some kind of ideological shift in our math instruction? Well, yeah, it's different. Yeah. All these parents complaining. He can't do anything about it. The person, and so, we went down to the archdiocese. What's going on? Well, there are new standards that we're following. It's by the state. It's part of the voucher law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then you go to the Department of Education. What's going on here? Well, those are owned and copyrighted, the standards, by the National Governors Association. And they're the only people who can change it, and are the only people who can delete, change, or edit the standards. So, do I knock on Arnie Duncan's door? Go to the school board. Why? They can't do anything. So it's education without representation. And there's a barrier now between a parent, where they used to go to the school board, that's no longer in effect.
And I'll just add one comment from Northwest. I would say that there's an education process going on, just like many in the audience here, of the issues. People will find it hard to believe that a set of standards were adopted when there's standards for science and math and history were not even available to review, but we've bought onto those as well. The Educator of the Year in Northwest Allen County was a gentleman who utilized what's called flipping the classroom. He videotaped his lectures, and they did homework in class so that they could rewind his lecture. They could go to other sources. He footnoted his sources, so you might go to something like Khan Academy to look up a little segment of something he was talking about, where then he spent one-on-one time with his students in the classroom covering their assignments from the homework perspective. So it is flipping the classroom. It's not good for every class, not good for every child, but for this class, which was a biology class, it worked very well. It gave the kids some ownership in how they were learning, but still meeting the standards or the expectations of the teacher. I made it quite clear to everyone on our school board that I believe, under full adoption of Common Core, that this practice, our Teacher of the Year, people who from Dartmouth University have been contacting him to learn more about his process and how he was able to achieve this, will no longer be able to teach that method, which has been so successful in Northwest Allen County.
My question is about the textbooks. In the past, Indiana has approved 6, and then each school board got to choose from those 6. I took part in one a few years ago, so I'm now assuming that it's going to come from the national and not even the states will have any choice about, and there will be no choices on the textbooks?
We passed the law a year ago or 2 years ago that the state no longer recommends or dictates what curriculum local schools use in Indiana. So the local school board is in charge today. They usually their curriculum committees meet with parents and teachers and administrators, but the school board makes the final choice then on what the curriculum is. The problem is they will have a limited choice. So these big companies out here, like Pearson is the largest education provider in the world. They will print books. McGraw-Hill will print books or have them printed. They'll have these 3 or 4 big companies that print these books. They'll all be Common Core oriented. You get your choices: Common Core, Common Core, Common Core, Common Core, Common Core. So that's basically the school board's going to only have the option of Common Core curriculum.
It costs a lot of money to do 4 different kinds of the same thing, which is dumb.
Yeah, well, that's okay though. I like the competition within that realm.
Actually, they'll save money because before the publishers created their curriculum with standards from Nevada, and that's what they sold in Nevada. And then they had the Indiana standards tucked in the back of the math textbook or the social studies book, and they sold that version to Indiana. Now there's only one set of standards, so the publishers will not lower their price, but they're going to make a whole lot more money because they don't have to invest in all these standards. So you understand the power they have, and I think if we dug deeper, they would be behind some of what's happening.
Well, I mean, if you look, they finally published a list of the people involved in writing the Common Core standards that achieved, like the people that they hired to bring in. And if you look at it, the majority of the people are from those publishing companies. You've got Pearson represented. You've got Educational Testing Services represented. One classroom teacher. One. I mean, when they tell you it's a state-led effort and parents and teachers and they got all this input on it, I mean, it is a blatant lie. And that's on Hoosiers Against Common Core. You can see the list of the people who were involved in the standards. I think you'll be shocked. It's actually an official list from the National Governors Association, and it's on my website, which is www.hoosiersagainstcommoncore, and I think my post is Who Wrote the Common Core? That's what it's under.
So do I understand correctly, because a Christian school went into the voucher program, we now have to take the PARC test? Is that what you're saying? I mean, there is no choice unless you back out of the voucher program.
Right.
I hope people are listening to that. That is very, very key to our Christian school.
It's key because, you know, the problem is that that test is what they're going to use to rank them on A through F or whatever system they come up with. I mean, I live in Indianapolis, and I'm telling you, there is a Catholic school. Any 3 miles you drive from my house, you can hit one. So when you publicly post, St. Luke's has an A, you know, St. Pius only got a C. No one's going to pick St. Pius. Regardless of the fact that the test means very little, it doesn't matter. And when you're a private school, enrollment's a big deal. And especially if they're in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I mean, they want every single seat filled, and the voucher's the way to do it. So there's this kind of a conflict of interest that I very, very much so see going on between the need for the money and how they are bringing down the education. I mean, I actually did a little experiment. I subbed. I went around, in Washington Township is the school district that I live in. My kids go to Catholic school. I subbed in 6 different schools to try to compare what my kid was doing at my school. Exact same books, exact same lesson plans, exactly the same thing. So school choice, I mean, Common Core is a straitjacket on the movement because, I mean, why do you think the Obama administration is throwing his arms open to vouchers, throwing his arms open to charters? I mean, do you think Obama is doing that so that people can have religious freedom in schools? I mean, we all know you got to be crazy to think that, right? Why is he into it? He wants everybody in the system. He wants everybody to be controlled. So that's how you get Catholics, religious groups, to participate. I mean, now if you want to be if you are really, truly an independent school and you want to take those, then you have to have the courage to say, I know the PARC assessment is going to require us to teach math that way. We don't care. And you have to be able to say, I'll take those tests, and I don't care what my kids get on them, because that's not important to us. You have to be able to take that risk, and I don't think many are at that position because enrollment and dollars are tight. And yes, and you will be in the data system, for sure. Absolutely. If you are in data, I actually have a little project that a guy down at the Department of Ed is working on for me. I gave him my children's first, middle, and last name, and I gave him my permission, and I said, I want you to tell me every single piece of data that you hold on my children who have been in Catholic schools their entire lives. I want to know what you have, and I want to know exactly what data the Catholic Archdiocesan schools are giving, because they tell you nothing, because they don't have to tell you anymore. I mean, the FERPA law that he referenced has been changed, not through Congress, just through regulation. And no longer do they need parental consent to share your child's information. And the groups that they're able to share that information to has been broadened under that regulation. They don't even have to tell you it's been shared. So that's why I did this route, because I want to see exactly where my kids' data is being stored, what exactly is there, and then see who has made any requests to it to see if it's been shared outside. Yep. It's all about the data. Data is the new gold. I mean, in this age, data can do a lot of things. Because if you're a politician or you're in leadership somewhere and you want to change policy, you can justify about anything with data. I mean, you can look at data and you can interpret it 10 different ways to say, you know what, because of this data, I've decided that we need this policy or that policy. It is a way of forming policy through data. But the interpretation of data is exponential. I mean, you could take data and have it say 5 different things. So whoever controls the data controls, I mean, I think I read an article that said something like, the hand that holds the data is the hand that rocks the world. And it's true. Why is Bill Gates involved?
Recognizing that Common Core is a child of Agenda 21, the United Nations, and Obama is following that very completely. And we had a bill in, I think it was a House bill, that would have banned anything to do with Agenda 21, which would have done away with Common Core. Alabama has done that. Do you think we can get it through our legislature at this time?
No. Yeah, I had one of the bills on that, and it got put to the Rules Committee by our leader and never saw the light of day. So education is probably the best method to do that. And I know one of the Tea Party people met with Senator Long just in the last week or two to talk about those things with him, which I think is the first long conversation he had ever had on the subject. So I think actually education is very crucial, and part of the plan I told them to do is you as 912 Tea Party group across the state of Indiana in the next 6 months need to be meeting with your elected representatives and senators to inform them of what's happening, because a lot of them just are not up to date on what's going on. They're just
Alabama now, but
Senator Kruse, do the Democrats have any idea what kind of weapon they're going to wield in 2014 on re-election, given the fact that it seems that the GOP is fighting for Common Core?
Well, with I'll just say in the 90% range. It could be 99% of the people like Common Core at this point in time across America. So is the Democrat Party supporting that? They think that's very good. The National Republican Committee took a unanimous vote against Common Core, which is one of the reasons I think we finally got our compromise in the conference committee at the end of session this time, is because the Republican leaders in the House saw how the whole United States Republican leadership said they don't want Common Core. So the Democrats would think that's a loser for the Republicans and a winner for the Democrats at this point in time. So we got you got a lot of information to get out to lots of people to change those percentages. But that's part of the reason Democrats are in power in the country.
What exactly was it we missed? Because it seemed to me like these appointments that were made by the governor should have been made in about 2 weeks instead of this last week. Was there a deadline to make that decision as far as...
the July 1 is when the new appointments were to be made, and so I think it is normal for a few days ahead for the governor to make the appointments just a couple weeks ahead of time. Legislative study committees in the process of being appointed. It should be announced, I would hope, by Monday. I've been telling people the 17th on Monday. May 23rd is when the Legislative Council met to decide what study committees would be in place for this year in Indiana. They did not determine who the members of those study committees were going to be. The leader of the House and the Senate, in the Republican side and the House and Senate Democrat side, they will make the appointments to each of the individual study committees, and I'm hopeful those announcements will be made next week. I mean, I thought they might be made this week, to be honest. We had our one-day session Wednesday. I thought they might announce it Wednesday, but hopefully soon, because we're going to need to start meeting.
So I have been working a little bit on the Legislative Council, just trying to help get information for it. I mean, it is really shaping up that the information that will be presented at this Legislative Council will be a definitive mark against Common Core. Scott Elliott, that wrote that, I don't know if you guys get the star up here, but he wrote an article saying it looks like by the state board appointments, you know, Mike Pence has spoken and Common Core is pretty safe. And he actually called me for a quote, which he didn't use, but that's all right. I'm used to it. But what I told him is that the information, the research, and the experts that are going to be put together and presented at this legislative finding is going to be really the best that's ever been done in the country anywhere. So I don't care if they're new. I don't care if they're existing board members who have said, I like Common Core. Because after they see our findings, to vote for the Common Core again would be to completely ignore the truth. I mean, it's going to be in their face. Common Core is not as good as what Indiana had. So it's going to be difficult.
I'm just going to add one little piece of information here, and this is something where each and everyone here can help a little bit and put some pressure on your Indiana State Board of Education representatives. Ian, is that slide? If you go to the next slide, Ian. There, it's by congressional district. So if you're here in the 3rd Congressional District, your representative is Carrie Wicker. Jeff Espic's daughter from the Uniondale area. But what I want to add to this is I have learned in the background that during the conference hearings that have occurred with the State Board of Education, it was quite common that only one board member and Governor and Tony Bennett's secretary were the only two in attendance. It was quite common. So many of these board members have not heard the arguments against Common Core or even those for them. They took the word of David Coleman, who came in, get a song and dance presentation. David Coleman, who's going to make an absolute fortune from the from his standard. Well, it's the SAT testing and College Board.
Yeah, he's the new president. So the architect of the Common Core is now the president of the College Board who decides the SAT, and he wants to align the SAT to the Common Core. But I think they do that to make people afraid and make school districts jump. Oh my God, the kids won't do well on the SAT. We got to be fully Common Core compliant. But they can't do that. It would be a lawsuit for the College Board to have a test aligned to only the standards of let's say half the states didn't do it. There's still 5 states that don't have Common Core. They can't do that.
And I'm pointing out that these include the new. These will be the July 1st Board of Education. So I would suggest you can go to the Indiana Board of Education, the Indiana State Board of Education, get their contact information. They will have email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, and I would suggest you put the pressure on them there. So. Riverview. Yes, it is.
Well, my name is Judy Watson. I'm from DeKalb County, and I'm with DeKalb 912 organization. And I could keep you here for the rest of the afternoon with what I would like to say. Just a few key points. Something that when the light bulb went off for me, I couldn't understand initially in the January meeting we went down to Indy for, that the Chamber of Commerce was just hugely for Common Core, and this big guy gets up and talks, president of it for the state, and the way he spun the information was ingenious, because I'm sitting in the audience thinking that's not quite right. That's not no. He's very good at what he does. But I went back to, why are they all over this? What's the big deal with them and their connection? And then I got informed more and more about the mining, the data mining, and how by the time your child's going to, well before they enter middle school, they're already, because of the data mining, will be designated as a worker bee, as somebody that is more potentially for college level or beyond, something greater than that, and they'll be targeted for that and schooled in that and pushed for that, and groomed for it. Now, part of me is like, there's really nothing totally wrong with that. I mean, to grow and prosper, etc., as a country, that might not be a bad idea. But then you're taking away those choices and those ambitions and the learning process of failing and gaining and trying and just life in particular. So we can't allow that to happen. What we've done there in DeKalb County is we've put together a brochure, and we have them out on the table, and many of you have picked them up. We're going to start at the grassroots level because if I talk to 100 people, 99 moms and dads don't know what I'm talking about. And so you have to be careful of how you talk to moms and dads, because they will naturally assume when you start talking this talk that you have definitely drank the Kool-Aid and gone off the deep end, and they will tune you out and try to get away from you as fast as possible. So we put together what we feel is a non-political stance on Common Core. This is something that should not be a Democrat-Republican issue. This is about our kids and our country's future on a whole. So we are going to attempt to get that out at every event, at every business that will set them out, hand them out, canvass your neighborhood any way we can. We've also developed the exact same information and put it in an emailable format. If you open this, which you can if I send it to you, it's not very readable. You can't read a trifold very well. It doesn't flow well with the information. So we also put it in an emailable 2-page document that you can then send to everybody on your email list, and hopefully this will spread faster than we can imagine. That's our hope. We've also been in contact with Central Indiana, who has a large organization. They've got this exact same information, only with their contact information on it. Mr. Jim Bratton in Southern Indiana has quite a large organization, and he is also spreading the word down there. So our goal is to do exactly what they're saying, make those phone calls, text, fax, do whatever you can, call on a daily basis. If these legislators that they're not on the Board of Education, they're busy doing their other work. But if they still get calls from you, they're finally going to contact these study committees and the Board of Education, and they're going to say, you know what, I'm getting like 150 calls. You guys got to be doing something about this. I mean, we've got to bombard them with this topic, and we can't stop. We can't stop this until it's done.
I'm a homeschool mother, so I'm just interested in the aspect of what's coming down the pike for us. My kids are not on the grid. They have never been on the grid. Is curriculum going to change for us? Will they dictate what I can buy?
I work with Answers in Genesis and some other groups, and they're very much not in favor of Common Core, obviously. So actually my husband and I were thinking, this is a great for the American kind of entrepreneur to create curriculums, because homeschool people are pretty good at that as well. But so now your choice is going to be, are you planning to send your child to a government college? Because the colleges very much do look at those tests. And so are you training your children to pass an ACT and SAT, which I do think they will align those, because that comes out of humanism. That is the humanist agenda. You know, look at the, if you look, that, but that is where actually, I'm a Purdue and IU grad and SUNY as well. So that is very much the mindset of those folks in leadership there. So the point is, do you want your child even attending that type of university, which is going to indoctrinate them as well? And that's where we're seeing a few colleges, like Hillsdale, does not take government money. There's another college in Pennsylvania, I believe, is it Pacific Grove or something. There's a couple colleges that are not necessarily aligned with that, and maybe we have a gentleman here from Hillsdale. Maybe he can address some of that too. I think people are going to have to think critically about whether you you really want your child put in that system. My mom was like this system. Those children were evaluated in kindergarten, Kinderschule. That's where the kindergarten name comes from. Those gifts and qualities that they had, she was split out to go to gymnasium because she was very bright. But yet she also had siblings that weren't quite as bright, and they would maybe go to tool and die, or they would go to sewing apprenticeship or something like that. So you have to think about, what about your child who is not such an early bloomer, and where are they going to be cataloged? But you as a homeschool parent have to think about, what type of profession am I going to train my child to do if we decide not to play the college game, if we decide not to go that direction? You and your husband
we're talking about this in our neighborhoods actually, about what are we going to train our children to do if they decide not to go along into that college background. And that doesn't mean that everyone's going to stay out of government colleges, but we have to think about, are they going to be prepared to do that?
I've been told that if my children take a college course that will like a dual credit,
right,
it would automatically validate my homeschool diploma. And my son wants to be a firefighter and he needs a fire science degree.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to do dual credit this year at Ivy Tech to be able to have that diploma that is accredited by the state and by
and just as I think someone said, you have to look at the intentions behind these different carrots that are being offered. Okay. And that is what people are starting to realize. Like the Stanford 10 that is done by the Bob Jones, we have to look at, they're having to turn that information into. So you have to look at where that information is going, because as a medical professional, I saw this coming years ago because we've been a beta site for electronic medical records for several years now. And they keep asking for more information, more information, more information. You'd be amazed what information we can find on you. And we don't even have to look for it. It just pops up on the screen. People are actually embarrassed that my 20-year-old techs may know that information. But the point is, HIPAA is a myth. I emailed Gary Bauer about this week and some other folks that are knowledgeable too. HIPAA, I was the HIPAA officer for our office when HIPAA first came out years ago. HIPAA is a loophole to be able to share information. HIPAA was about portability of information, that if you lost your job, then you would not be able to you wouldn't lose your insurance by those pre-existing conditions. But HIPAA is about sharing information. It's not about protecting your information. And many, many people are very ignorant about that. They use HIPAA as if it is a way to protect your information. When you sign that form, you sign that information in to be submitted to the whole HIPAA universe. Because of insurance, because of statisticians, Health and Human Services, IRS. I emailed Gary Bauer and I said, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. I said, isn't HIPAA like dead, like it was to start with? He goes, didn't you see the 60 million IRS requisitioned health records? He goes, HIPAA's, basically it's a dead thing. But people have not been thinking. They've been indoctrinated into these things for many years.
Again, they've been promised they're going to get skilled workers who will be able to do the things they need them to do in order for their factories and things to work. And for instance, when my daughters took the career aptitude testing, I don't know what it's called, but she came out as a farmer, and we all got a big laugh about that, because if the government is choosing the career for her, she's going to be a farmer. Well, she's allergic to animals. She always has her hair in place. She would never get her hands dirty. And right now she's a physician's assistant. She's a straight A student. Had another friend who aspired to be someone who would go to NASA and be an astronaut. But when she took her college career aptitude test, it said she should be a garbage collector. So what you have to understand is the big business is being promised that the kids who can't come out and read and write now and do basic math are going to be work ready. And they are also going to be slotted to go into certain careers. So this is a huge socialistic program, but the businesses like the chamber, and that's part of the reason why the Republicans have been kind of backing it, is because the chamber is huge behind this, is because they want workers who are qualified to handle the jobs. And right now they're having a hard time finding them.
Let's take a couple more questions real quick. Okay, then you want right there then? Wherever. Well, understood. We just need to
Hi, I am from Wabash, Indiana, and I did call the office. Chris Crabtree. Here, can I read it to you? Really expected more from Pence on Common Core. He could have put Indiana at the top. He surely will have grandchildren someday. Oh well, life will go on, and we will keep praying for our country and state. Disappointed in his appointments. Pardon me for asking, but who is this? Evidently, I wasn't in his. I had his number, but he didn't have mine. And I said, Bonnie Korn from Wabash. Oh, hi, Bonnie. I'm sorry to hear you are disappointed. You may want to reserve judgment until you see the hard questions they are going to ask of Common Core. Have you had a chance to read appointee Andrea Neal's columns on the topic? And she is one of them up there. We'll check it out, I said. Google Andrea Neal and Common Core, and you will find several columns she has written on the topic. She has really taken it to task. Brad Oliver, which is in 6, is a solid, limited government Christian conservative. I know him very well and helped recruit him to be on the State Right to Life Board. He will look critically at the issues. Where is Governor Pence on Common Core, I ask. Oops, I lost it. Hold on a minute. I'm back. Okay. Take a look. Let's see. Where is Governor Pence on the Common Core? Take a look at this column, which includes his statement, and it's on the Washington Times. I've got that if anybody wants that. Can you tell me, where am I losing him? Can you tell me why he reappointed the 2 that were already in favor of Common Core? I'm not doing that. During their interviews, they committed to exercise strong scrutiny on Common Core. This is a new administration, and they are supportive of this governor's agenda and will look at him for guidance. The end.
I think we can only hope that maybe these other people, and they will take a fresh look. I think if they're doing their job, that'll be part of it. So what I'm going to do now is I think that, unfortunately we need to. There's a couple more events here at the church tonight, and so I want to do that. So first, I'd like to thank all of our speakers that were here tonight. We'll give them a round of applause. And I'm sure they will be hanging around a little bit for further questions if you'd like to have that. And finally, I'd like to thank Pastor Jeremy, Pastor Don, and the staff here, Ian, as well, here at Central Ministries for allowing us the forum and allowing us the facilities to share this information with all of you today. We do thank you. Oh, the County Councilman Kevin Howell here as well. So I would like to thank Jeremy and the staff here. We really do appreciate it. And with that, you're all dismissed.